Atahualpa was the most powerful man in the Americas. He ruled an empire 5,000 kilometers long, with millions of subjects and armies that had crushed every enemy in their path. Yet on a single November day in 1532, he was captured by just 168 Spanish conquistadors, an event that would forever alter the course of Latin American history. Atahualpa arrived in Cajamarca carried on a golden litter, surrounded by thousands of warriors, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The Spanish were waiting in ambush. In a matter of minutes, everything collapsed. To understand that moment, we have to go back decades earlier. Atahualpa's story doesn't begin in Cajamarca. It begins in the palaces of Cusco in the northern expansion campaigns and within an imperial succession crisis that the Inca Empire never truly resolved. The Tahuantinsuyu was the vastest civilization the continent had ever seen. 4 suyos, or regions, stretching from southern Colombia to northern Argentina and from the Pacific coast to the edge of the Amazon rainforest. Everything was ruled from Cusco, the capital and the navel of the world, according to the Incas. Tahuantinsuyu literally translates to the 4 regions. It wasn't a humble name, it was a geopolitical statement. The Sapa Inca, the supreme ruler, was revered as the son of Inti, the sun god, literally a divinity in the flesh, acting as the bridge between humanity and the cosmos. His authority required no political justification because his legitimacy was sacred. This system worked for centuries as long as there was an unquestioned, unambiguously appointed Sapa Inca. The empire's chronic flaw, however, was succession. The Incas practiced polygamy. The Sapa Inca had a principal wife, the Qhapaq, usually a sister, whose son was heir to the throne. But he also had dozens, sometimes hundreds of secondary wives whose sons were also princes, ambitious, royal, and eligible. Thus, Inca history was constantly punctuated by civil wars during royal transitions. Atahualpa was not the first succession crisis, he was simply the last. Before we get to him, we must talk about his father, Qhapaq. Taking power in the late 15th century, Qhapaq expanded the empire further north into present-day Ecuador and southern Colombia, conquering fierce tribes like the Quinaras, the Quetas, and the Caringues. While this northern expansion was his greatest achievement, it was also his fatal strategic error. By establishing his base of operations in Quito and spending decades away from Cusco, he created a deep cultural and geographic rift within the empire. He fathered sons in the south raised in Cusco's traditions and sons in the north raised in the newly conquered regions, backed by hardened military generals. 2 distinct worlds within one empire. Atahualpa belonged to the north. Growing up in Quito alongside his father, he learned warfare from a young age and earned the respect of the empire's most seasoned generals. Huáscar, his brother, belonged to the south. Raised in Cusco and backed by the traditional nobility, Huáscar was the obvious heir according to imperial protocol. But by all historical accounts, Huáscar was impulsive, cruel, and deeply paranoid. Around 1527, Qhapaq died suddenly, not from battle, but from a mysterious European disease, likely smallpox, that traveled faster along trade routes than the conquistadors themselves. The Inca civilization began dying of Old World plagues before ever setting eyes on a single European. Along with Qhapaq, his designated heir also died, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. 2 main candidates, 2 military strongholds, and no peaceful mechanism to resolve the claim. By 1529, the fragile peace shattered into open civil war. Huáscar commanded the traditional Cusco army, while Atahualpa had two military geniuses on his side, Quisquis and Chalchichamac. These two generals led Atahualpa's seasoned northern troops through years of brutal campaign, eventually crushing Huáscar's army at the decisive Battle of Qhapaq Ñan near Cusco. Huáscar was captured and Atahualpa had won. Resting at the thermal baths of Cajamarca, celebrating his victory over his brother, Atahualpa received his first reports of strange foreigners arriving on the coast. 168 men led by Francisco Pizarro. Pizarro's numerical disadvantage was absurd against Atahualpa's 80,000 camped warriors. However, Atahualpa invited them into Cajamarca, viewing them not as an immediate threat, but as a minor curiosity to be observed and evaluated on his own terms. On November 16, 1532, Atahualpa entered Cajamarca's central plaza in a magnificent royal procession. What he didn't know was that Pizarro had hidden his men, artillery, and cavalry inside the surrounding buildings, planning a cold, calculated ambush. Friar Vicente de Valverde approached Atahualpa's litter with an interpreter, presenting a Bible and demanding he submit to the Spanish crown and the Christian faith. Misunderstanding the gesture and receiving a poor translation, Atahualpa examined the book, heard nothing from it, and threw it to the ground. Valverde gave the signal and absolute chaos broke out. Spanish guns roared, cavalry charged, and steel blades cut through the crowd. Inca warriors shielded Atahualpa with their bodies, dying one after another to keep his golden litter elevated. Finally, the litter fell and Pizarro personally seized the emperor. The entire slaughter lasted less than 2 hours. Without its divine leader, the central authority collapsed instantly. That night, Pizarro dined with his royal captive. Atahualpa maintained his dignity, quickly assessing his captors. Observing their obsession with precious metals, he made a legendary offer. He would fill a room 7 meters long and 5 meters wide once with gold and twice with silver in exchange for his freedom. Orders were dispatched along the Inca road network. Temples across the empire, including the sacred Coricancha in Cusco, were stripped of golden linings, statues, and masterwork artifacts. Thousands of pounds of priceless cultural treasures arrived in Cajamarca, only to be melted down into anonymous gold ingots by the Spanish. It was the largest single ransom in human history. Yet Pizarro never intended to honor the deal. Paralyzed by rumors of incoming Inca armies and terrified of Atahualpa's lingering authority over his millions of subjects, Pizarro realized that keeping the emperor alive was a permanent threat, and after Atahualpa secretly ordered the execution of his captive brother Huáscar from behind bars, his fate was sealed. Atahualpa feared that Pizarro might use his captive brother Huáscar as a puppet ruler, legitimized by the Cusco nobility to control the empire through him. Correctly reading the political danger, Atahualpa ordered Huáscar's execution from behind bars. This cost him any remaining sympathy among the Cusco elite, who already viewed him as an outsider. When Atahualpa's own trial came, the voices that could have spoken in his defense remained silent. The trial was a legal sham. Pizarro assembled a makeshift court of conquistadors with no legal training. The charges included idolatry, polygamy, fratricide, and conspiring against the Spanish. Some charges were true, but they amounted to applying 16th century European laws to standard Inca statecraft. Polygamy was an established imperial institution. polytheism was their native faith, and Huáscar's death was a military decision in an internal civil war. Hernando de Soto, one of the most respected captains in the expedition, openly opposed the execution. Having spent time with Atahualpa, de Soto respected the emperor and argued that executing a sovereign without King Charles Lee's consent was an illegal political mistake. To bypass his opposition, Pizarro sent de Soto away on a reconnaissance mission. The sentence was death by burning at the stake. Through interpreters, Catholic priests explained what this meant. To the Incas, burning destroyed the physical body, preventing mummification and severing the sacred continuity required for the afterlife. For Atahualpa, it was worse than biological death. It was the total annihilation of his soul. They offered an alternative: convert to Christianity and the execution would be carried out by garrote, a quicker death that preserved the body from mummification. With pragmatic coldness, Atahualpa accepted baptism, taking the name Juan. On July 26, 1533, Atahualpa was executed in the main plaza of Cajamarca. He was between 30 and 35 years old. The civil war he fought to win had lasted years. His effective rule over a unified empire lasted months, and the captivity that killed him lasted less than a year. When Hernando de Soto returned and learned of the execution, the hardened conquistador wept, understanding the catastrophic long-term mistake Pizarro had made. The collapse of the Inca Empire was not instantaneous. Atahualpa's death severed the central nerve, leaving the state without coordination, but the resistance continued for 4 decades. Pizarro entered Cusco in November 1533, placing puppet rulers on the throne until Manco Inca, another prince of the royal bloodline, realized collaboration was a dead end. In 1536, Manco Inca launched a massive rebellion, mobilizing an army of over 100,000 warriors to lay simultaneous siege to Cusco and Lima. For months, the Spanish in Cusco faced annihilation as Inca warriors used slingshots with red-hot stones to burn the city's thatched roofs. The siege ultimately failed not due to Spanish military superiority, but because of the agricultural calendar. Manco Inca's army consisted of peasant farmers who had to return to their fields for the planting season. Retreating into the dense jungle mountains northwest of Cusco, Manco Inca established the Neo-Inca state of Vilcabamba, a miniature empire that resisted Spanish rule for 40 years. It took 4 decades, multiple rebellions, and the fall of the last Sapa Inca, Qhapaq Ñan, in 1572 for the Spanish to finally extinguish the state. Pizarro himself did not live to see the final victory. He was assassinated in his Lima palace in 1541 by rival Spanish factions. The conquest devoured its own protagonists just as ruthlessly as it had consumed the Tahuantinsuyu. The loss of the Inca Empire was not just the downfall of a regime, but the destruction of a unique civilization. Their road system, the Qhapaq Ñan, spanned over 30,000 kilometers across 5,000-meter mountains, coastal deserts, and rainforests. Their agricultural terraces and complex storage systems managed abundance so effectively that no one in the empire suffered from hunger, a social safety net centuries ahead of Europe. Atahualpa's execution, condemned even by King Charles V as a political blunder, forced the Spanish to rely on brutal violence for generations. The combination of European epidemics, forced labor, and institutional collapse wiped out up to 90% of the indigenous population over the following century, the most severe demographic collapse in human history. Yet the legacy endured. Today, Quechua is still spoken by nearly 10 million people. Inca stonework remains standing through major earthquakes, and traditional Andean community structures persist. On his final night, Atahualpa was surrounded by loyal servants who wept and offered to die alongside him according to royal tradition. When the garrote tightened the next morning, it didn't just end the life of one man. The system that had functioned for centuries on the sacred authority of its ruler. The belief that the world possessed order because the son of the sun was on his throne could not survive the sight of that same ruler strangled in a plaza by 168 strangers. That is what was lost in Cajamarca, not just a man, but an entire way of understanding the universe and humanity's place within it. And for that loss, no amount of gold could ever pay the ransom. I hope you enjoyed this documentary on the last Inca emperor. See you in the next one.